So hello everyone, I'm Rebecca from Seawolf Sustainability Consulting, and I'm really delighted today to be joined by Anirudh. Anirudh, please introduce yourself.
Hi Rebecca, I'm Anirudh Valluri, based here in Amsterdam, very close to where Rebecca is as well. I have a background in environmental engineering and sustainable finance. I've worked in the ESG and sustainable finance space now in Europe for approximately 6 years. And then prior to that was in India working with the environmental and in the environmental and infrastructure advisory space.
Great. Well, good to meet you today. And first question, what's your connection to finance or financial services? Just curious to hear a bit more.
Yeah. So I've spent the last few years working with and working in ESG, with ESG data in particular, predominantly engaging with institutional investors in Europe, the Benelux, in the UK. So these obviously include asset owners, large pension funds here, some private equity firms as well. I kind of came to this side of finance kind of circuitously, you could say. I started off as an engineer, moved back to India, where I got to kind of work with environmental monitoring solutions and the public sector as a consultant. That experience really kind of showed me that it's nice to have a good idea. There's many good ideas in the world, especially when it comes to solving issues related to the environment or social issues. But you still need to kind of work within the larger socioeconomic system, which means you need to tackle the finance side of things, which kind of brought me to Europe. And I specifically wanted to understand how investors can kind of assess what their perceived investment risks are as it pertains to the environment or social aspects, as well as the intended impact that they might want to have via their investment.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. And we also worked together for a couple of years as well, a few years ago. So yeah, working with some different financial institutions and working on ESG and sustainability, etc. So fond memories of that time, Anirudh.
Yeah. I was just going to say it was a very good time for me. I fondly remember my time when we worked together. We created some real change, I'd like to think. So.
Yeah, me too. I'd like to think so. And thinking about that experience, maybe your experience before as well, so whether in Europe or when you're in India, how did it look and feel when you were interacting with finance? You mentioned about risks and opportunities and analysing some of those things. So just curious to get a little bit more colour on that experience.
Yeah, no, I think the experience in India was an interesting one. We engaged a lot with the public sector as well as the private sector in bringing technological solutions to the market. There was a huge movement for smart city development in India that needed a lot of kind of public-private participation, and we were in the middle of that, in the thick of it. I think there's a very distinct experience in India that you can have when it comes to things like this, and what I mean by that is the role technology has is only as good as its ability to reach the masses and the incentives it has for people in power. We would often in the early days go into these kind of engagements with state and national entities, and walk in with a lot of confidence about the technical capabilities that we had. But of course, it was a very steep learning curve to understand that, well, okay, the best solution isn't always the one that wins. You need to have something that has a revenue model. And I'll never forget a question that I got from one employee when we presented an air pollution monitoring tool to them. And the question was, this is great. I'm glad that you can forecast air pollution across the city, but what's the revenue model here? How does this really make sense for the state or for the technology provider? And so it really kind of forces you to think and forces people to think about how solutions can actually work in reality. And it's not just about developing markets. It's, I think developing markets, it's a bit more of an acute need, but it's the same story everywhere. So it's, that was kind of my initial kind of foray into working and the experience in trying to understand the importance of finance and the relevance of a business application for investors. I think in moving to Europe and moving to the Netherlands to work in the sustainable finance space specifically, as you know very well, it's been kind of an interesting journey in the ESG and the climate space. I think the early 2020s, late 2010s. You felt like you were at the forefront of some sort of financial revolution. It felt like it was a bit inevitable for this next wave to kind of revitalize the space. And fast forward to today, it's a slightly different situation. I think in general it's been a good experience because what I've kind of learned is that there is still very much a need to quantify non-financial concepts and to make them as relevant as possible, so that it's ingested into the global economic system, and then from within kind of have that kind of an impact. It's not a new idea, the quantification of non-financial issues. I mean, it's been there with the SRI movement, for example, in the past. But I think we've come to a stage now where I think we need to move past kind of this quantification of just the concepts as attributes and just as themselves, and keep pushing forward into new frontiers, despite political sentiments, whatever they might be.
Yeah, I definitely recognise some of that myself, and that sort of being an accountant, I think always focusing on some of those metrics, returns, traditional metrics like payback periods, etc. So definitely sort of very traditional start in finance, and then increasingly some of those metrics that you mentioned around environment, social, etc. And yeah, there's been I think you allude to a little bit of the political pushback more recently, but in some ways, I think it might not be a bad thing in the long run as a whole, because it does really mean refocusing, thinking about those risks and opportunities, the quantification, but also sort of the implementation and just really making sure there's rigor around some of those solutions. So yeah, it's definitely a bit of a mixed bag these days working in this area. And yeah, maybe what were some of your takeaways? So as you've been working so far, and as you think about this, both good or bad, maybe when you were interacting with financial institutions yourself or today, Yeah, what have been some of your takeaways from that experience?
I'm a big believer. I'll start with the good news. I usually start with the bad, but I think today I'll start with the good. I think what's really interesting working in Europe is, despite a lot of um, pushback in mainstream media and within ESG circles as well about the overuse of regulations within Europe. I think overall regulations are a net positive. And maybe that's me sitting in Europe for a while now. I've been brainwashed, but I think the strength of society is almost determined by the strength of its institutions, in a sense, and strong institutions that are kind of spending time trying to create regulations for ESG, or for things that go beyond just kind of a free market approach to things, are super valuable investments in a medium to long term. So I think from an ESG or from a sustainability perspective, I think regulations are a net positive. I don't think climate and energy security are issues that are going to go away. So that's been kind of a nice, kind of a positive takeaway, despite everything that we've seen. I also like the fact that a lot of sustainability movements have withstood the political pressure from outside. There's so many examples of European and Benelux investors or Nordic investors standing their ground when it comes to certain environmental issues or considerations. The I guess the flip side is that there's, in this moment of serious volatile factors, factors that affect volatility and make the market in general a lot more uncertain. You're seeing AI, you're also seeing threats to sovereignty. I think the big danger for ESG is not irrelevance as it comes to conceptual strengths, but kind of affecting, or letting politics kind of affect or influence capital allocation so much so that it moves away from things that are quite frankly directly going to impact our quality of life, whether it comes to water access due to AI or food access due to droughts. So those are kind of some of the larger kind of negative takeaways that I think we need to keep in mind. And then I think as kind of a natural progression, I'm as I mentioned earlier, I think I'm interested in looking at what happens next, or what goes on after this kind of wave of ESG has curved down, let's say.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. And actually, you prompted me to think with the comment, regulations are a net positive. And I think I would agree, actually. I think it's important to have those guardrails. Of course, there's a balance in having them.
Yeah.
And I do think one reflection I've been having recently is with a lot of the regulations and compliance, it has been a bit of a tick box exercise, unfortunately. It probably has been overusing the stick of regulation and forcing people to do things. So I think now sort of focusing a bit more on the incentives and what are the benefits, and as I said, the commercial opportunities. I think that's really important, as well as some of the metrics under the E and the S, environment and social. They're neutral. If what you choose to do with them is your choice. It's just about measuring them. So it's really, even looking at, you mentioned AI, data centers, it's simply measuring water usage, energy consumption, utilization. And then, the choice then about what to do is a different topic. And of course, that will have all sorts of social, political, and financial consequences. But the measurement itself is a neutral activity, or at least that's the way I see it. And maybe that leads sort of nicely. I'm very curious about what you're doing now. It's been a little while, a few years, I think, since we worked together. So you talked a bit about your background and working in India and then in the Netherlands. So today, what are you doing, investigating and thinking about in that topic, whether it's inside, outside work? Just curious what you're up to today.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think, maybe I'll just take a short step back, which is that I, at the end of my time with Morningstar, I saw these two things happen in parallel, right? Like one of them was to do with asset classes and types of instruments, and then the other thing was to do with the way in which we're measuring and viewing non-financial risk or non-financial impact. I use the word non-financial because I think most financial analysis done by serious investors kind of almost prices in market risk that isn't financial as a kind of standard factor. But leaving that aside, I think I saw these two things. The first trend, and this is to do with the asset class, was around the need for fixed income data, specifically impact-focused fixed income data. Equities kind of led the way. Listed equities led the way when it comes to ESG research. There's the loans, fixed income instruments have lagged in the sense of having standardized outputs and standardized data available for investors. That's quickly changing. So that's a company that I helped set up with a co-founder of mine called SFI Data. Angle and the other kind of topic that I'm really interested about, and I'm kind of dedicated most of my time to this idea now, is around the assessment of these non-financial issues, but within a system. So how do you look at investments through the lens of a system, and look at how kind of the dynamics of a system kind of can be measured, whether it's the causality between two topics or two areas, and how they kind of combine to affect your investment. So with my company called Jungle, I'm trying to build a systems intelligence company that focuses on non-financial risk and impact. I've spent the last few months now building and consolidating a methodology that I've called the Systemic Impact Framework, and it essentially attempts to consolidate and kind of crystallize a way in which investors can track and assess causality between different types of areas, risk domains or impact domains, and how they relate to a central thesis.
Okay, interesting. So there's SFI data, and that's looking at fixed income and bonds. So those IOUs, sort of financial instruments. And then this sort of jungle impact, and this sort of looking at almost system thinking, if I'm not wrong. And when you talk about a system, maybe a quick follow-up, you're not thinking about an IT system, but it's more thinking about the different connections and sort of thinking about finance, but in the whole system of finance and those interconnections between the financial, the social, and the environmental. Is that the way to think about it? That's
exactly right. Yeah. So instead of kind of if if you put yourself in an investor's shoes, instead of purely focusing on a company's performance and financial metrics, which I think are still the core of any financial analysis for an investor,
Yeah.
by their very nature. But what if you, as an investor, would also want to look at the company, which then, that node depends on multiple external factors that are more often than not outside of the control of the investor. So these could include things like, regulatory design, water dependence or environmental dependence, social constraints, institutional bottlenecks or infrastructure capacity, things that essentially affect the investee company in a constrained way. Can you quantify how those externalized nodes interact with each other to then impact your investee company?
Yeah, really interesting. And I think particularly relevant today because there's all those outside factors, as you say, beyond the sort of purely financial, and ultimately they turn up in the financial performance, but it's trying to get that sort of indicator, I assume, of some of those outside factors. And I would assume that your background, and particularly in engineering, would really help with that. But yeah, I was just curious, maybe based on some of your prior experience, whether it's education or sort of working, have some of those prior learnings helped with what you do now? And I know you sort of founded companies as well. So has that helped with what you're doing today? Because it's quite a big step.
Yeah. It's one of those things. I think well, I mean, I think the short answer is yes, absolutely. I think my educational background and work experience, have kind of led up to this point, let's say. I think I'm not a great engineer. I'll be the first one to say that. but I think studying engineering as a discipline helps you to think in kind of sequential terms, in terms of not just linearly, but also kind of in terms where you need to consider multiple variables and how they kind of interact with each other. I think applying that, a lot of I think interesting insight can come from this kind of externalized value system being applied to another discipline. And so I think over here, as an engineer working within the ESG space in particular, it's been interesting for me to kind of put together not just, how do you quantify it? Going back to that earlier point of how do you quantify these things that are non-financial, but then now that you've done it, what next? What does it mean really from a tangible perspective to make a decision? And so, I think that's definitely helped. That kind of background has definitely helped me come to this point and where I am right now. And what I really wanted to answer was, most of the analysis that you can do with ESG data as it comes prepackaged anyway is, risk exists in this domain. This is how your company is exposed to that risk, and this is what your company is doing to manage that specific risk. I kind of wanted to go in a bit deeper than that, right? So I wanted a way to be able to say, if Regulation 1 tightens or becomes stricter in this way, let's say regulation around cybersecurity. If regulation around cybersecurity tightens, does it hinder the procurement cycle? Does it lengthen the sales cycle? Does it shorten deployment timelines for this company that's, let's say, doing grid forecasting solutions for the energy grid in the Benelux? And so what does that mean? Because you are now sitting on this pile of ESG data, but what can you do with it to really come to some real kind of tangible outcomes that aren't simply related to um, bi-directional relationships between the company and that specific risk. So that's kind of how I kind of settled on this idea, and I decided to just take the plunge and see what I could do. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. And yeah, I'll definitely get it. Sort of looking at those different interconnections. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and it's definitely something I've been thinking about and rework on too. Is of course you've got that data, but it's taking that data and making it information, and it might not necessarily be that you act on it, but at least you can have a more informed, rounded picture, can scenario plan, sort of look at what might happen or might not happen depending on how different decisions are taken. But yeah,
Exactly.
I definitely get that. And again, so thinking about your personal journey, your career journey, and education, if you sort of looking today, if you could go back and tell your former self, sort of back in the day when you were younger, if you could tell your former self something or give yourself some piece of advice, what do you think that would be?
So it's always a tricky question. I think learn systems thinking a bit earlier, maybe. No, but I think I think the most important lesson, and this might sound like I've got it off of some motivational note I found on the street or something, but I think it's important to kind of listen to your gut when there are certain moments, I think, when you can't stop thinking about an idea, or you have a very strong feeling about wanting to do something in particular. And I started following that intuition, I think a little later than I would have liked to. That's part of the learning process, as in the maturing process. But I think I would just tell myself to trust that feeling, and even if it's wrong, well, next time it's just a way to kind of find out. So I think that's kind of the biggest lesson, and I have to give a shout out to a career coach that I worked with a few years ago, who kind of helped me with this. His name's Justin, and he really kind of really helped me out with kind of formalizing my thought process around this.
Yeah, that's a good one. So trust your gut, and yeah, definitely those advisors, mentors, career coaches, like big thanks and shout out to them. I know I find it useful even to this very day, just having someone to bounce ideas from, often who might not be anything to do with my work directly or the topic we work in with sustainability. And it's sometimes just helpful to have that independent perspective and get a bit of guidance and listen as well.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And yeah, maybe sort of final thoughts, final summing up, any final words, otherwise we will draw to a close.
No, I think not much else from me. It's been a pleasure to be on this podcast, Rebecca. So thanks for that. But also just it's a very interesting time to be in the space, and and I think staying in touch with people, like-minded people in the space, and working together is probably how we can make a much bigger difference than just listening to all the doom and gloom.
Definitely, yeah. Sort of trying to talk to others, collaborate, and yeah, I try to be a bit glass half full. There's definitely a lot of doom and gloom out there in the world, so
It's hard.
yeah, having a little bit of hope as well is important. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Annie. It was really great to hear your experience. Really appreciate the sharing. And yeah, thanks to everyone for listening. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.